Greetings, welcome, hello, happy Sunday. We hope everybody is at your highest possible level of mental, physical, and spiritual health today. Hope you're truly doing well. And we certainly appreciate you. And thank you for joining us today for our 96th edition of Our Ancestors' Voices. We're closing in on 100 weeks of doing this program. And we appreciate each and every one of you who is here with us. Especially today, this topic is critically important, this topic of Africa and identity confusion. And so if you're a person of African descent, this topic should have fundamental importance and interest to you, because the primary question is, how is it that you live in Africa or you live in a country outside of Africa that has a large population of African people, but yet nobody knows anything about Africa. Nobody knows anything about African history. Nobody knows anything about what's happening with Africa today. Nobody knows anything about how we ended up where we are today. Nothing, no details, nothing. How is that possible? And even if you're not African, you should still have the same question, because if you think about that question, then there are other questions related to whatever your identity is. And I'm sure you'll find that the same types of confusion still exist. Like, how are you know nothing about the Americas before 1492? So that's why it's such an important topic. We're glad you're here to join us. We give honor and thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, their righteous struggle to get their land back and achieve self-determination for all of the indigenous nations across the Western Hemisphere, from Alaska all the way down to Chile. And we give honor and respect to our African ancestors who fight and have always fought to allow us to have the freedom and self-determination that we have as a people. Whatever we have, we owe to them. So we are so thankful for their efforts and their contributions, and certainly their sacrifices. So we're glad that you're here with us for this important topic. And we'll go ahead and get started with our usual round of introductions. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP, the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party that is based in Africa. We are not based in the United Snakes of America. We are based in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, which we define as the total liberation and unification of Africa under one continental scientific socialist government. That's our objective. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah, the founder of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, his Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, seen on the right-hand side of the screen. And in that book, he talks about the necessary strategy to unite all of the Pan-African liberation forces on the ground throughout the African continent who agree with the objective of Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa. And you see some of the logos there are some of the entities that we work regularly with in building the capacity to create this worldwide Pan-African fighting force. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. Azania is the actual name of the country, that the colonial name you go by, South Africa. The PAIGC is the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the liberation movement in Guinea-Bissau that gained independence for that country, that was founded by Amilcar Cabral, who was also a co-founder of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the Democratic Party of Guinea, or the PDG, ZAPO, the Zanian People's Organization, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Nigeria, the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone, the Kenyan Socialist League. There are many other organizations that we work with. And for the next several weeks, we're going to be highlighting the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists. They are one of our sibling political parties, obviously, in Zimbabwe. And we are attempting to help them raise money so that they can purchase books. And by books, we don't mean See Jane Run, See Dick Walk. We're talking about books by Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, books by Sickle, Women in Society, the History of Class Struggle, books by Kwame Nkrumah, by Thomas Sankara, by revolutionary Pan-Africanists. So the only way we'll do that, if you know anything about shipping overseas, it's virtually impossible to buy up volumes of books and ship them overseas. That would be thousands of dollars. We don't have that capacity to do that. So instead, what we are attempting to do is ask people to make donations, small donations, and 100% of those donations for the next several weeks will go to the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists. And once we complete that, probably sometime in April, then we'll move on to another sibling party in Africa. So we appreciate your support with that. And our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by All African People's Revolutionary Party organizers, myself, Ajamu Umi, and my daughter, Shakura Umi, who are both very active in the AAPRP and excited to be here with you. And so to get us started for this very important topic, Africa and identity confusion, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Greetings, Madasi. How is everyone? Hoping you all are in good spirits and really excited to talk about today's topic, as my dad just said, because I've been really reflecting and trying to think about, what is something new that I can give you? What's a new nugget that I can share with you for this weekend? And I think this topic is so important because really what it comes down to is unpacking why so many Africans are resisting the truth that lies in front of them, right? So why are people resisting understanding and knowing who they are? Why are they fighting against that? Why are they trying to build up walls and accepting everything that is based on lie and mistruth, but not interested in seeking the actual truth that comes before them? And so in doing that, I just think we should think about how the focus of this week's section is on this trend among African or Black people, but we say African because we, unlike capitalism and imperialism, understand that the whole purpose is for us to connect back to the continent. We're not afraid to be identified as African. And we understand that media puts out lies every single day about what Africa looks like, how Africa operates, and how the countries are functioning. So we, unlike corporate America, understand that being African is not a bad thing. It is actually a humane and beautiful thing. And one would be so lucky to descend from Africa. So we understand that there's a trend among African people, and it's a trend based on capitalist-inspired disdain for legitimate intellectual work, for the idea of studying. So we frown upon that in this society, to be able to study and articulate things and to break things down and to be critical. We frown upon being able to build up ideas, to build up analysis, and to have development. Those things are frowned upon. It's actually more attractive for you to be ignorant. That's the highlight. Like, you're really doing good things if you don't have information. And if you don't know what you're talking about, then you should actually talk louder, because that means you really don't know what you're talking about. Clearly, I'm being sarcastic and trying to help us understand that that's the trend. And that trend has been around since before I was born, maybe even before you were born. That trend has been around since Islam was stolen, okay? That's been the narrative that's been pushed and shoved down each of our throats. So it is a trend that suggests that obtaining a PhD from watching a YouTube video is sufficient in understanding the forces that impact our lives without ever developing the ability of critical thinking skills and comprehensive analysis. So you don't even have the ability to think for yourself. You don't have the ability to unpack things. You don't have the ability to try to process things and to take prior knowledge and see how you can blend that in with building up information you're currently taking in, so that you can develop, as I say, a wavering analysis based off of what you need to know versus what you have came into knowing, and also what you're still meant to learn. All of those things require your ability to process information and to categorize it, and then to be able to retrieve it later when you need it. And so an example of this would be that our focus today is designed to debunk that YouTube is generated as a perspective by some that it is some significant number of people of African descent who do not descend from Africa. That there are African people who exist within the Western Hemisphere who have always been here, and that there are actually a significant percentage of us who have never had a connection to Africa. That is the absurdity that we plan to dismiss. The basis of this argument is rooted in circumstantial evidence and conspiracy theories with no basis in material reality and truth. And so we have to continue to think about how detrimental that can be to ourselves, but also to our family members, to our coworkers, to our friends, to our families, and the children who are yet to come after us. And so if we don't know who we are, then how are we to teach them who they are? If we can't even tell them that we are proud to be Africans, then why would we expect them to be proud of who they are? And is their self-esteem able to deal with yet another dysfunction? Because we've already put a lot on them as a society, right? So the one thing that we can give the youth, the one thing that we can give the future is helping them understand exactly who they are, which means we can't be flip-floppy about that. That means that we have to be committed to our principles, which means we have to understand who we are. And that means that we have to unlift the veil of ignorance, as Booker T said, and we have to understand that that means reading about Africa. That means understanding that CNN is lying to you. So who better to learn about Africa than to pick up a book from one of the presidents who actually worked in Africa and helped to decolonize one of the countries? We've mentioned Marcus Garvey. We've mentioned Kwame Nkrumah. We've mentioned Amilcar Cabral. These are just different examples of folks who were doing work on the continent. So they are the ones that are teaching us about all the minerals and resources that Africa has, which makes it the richest continent on the planet. They are the ones that are teaching us why so many people are still stealing resources to this day. They are the ones teaching us that, not MSNBC, not Facebook or wherever you get your news from, because I have no idea, because I don't mess with that nonsense. I pick up Kwame Nkrumah's book for everything. And yes, my family, I cite him in my doctoral papers. Yes, I do. You better bet your bottom I do. You better bet it, because my professors don't even know who Kwame Nkrumah is. So if they don't know, that means I need to teach them while I'm correctly learning how to cite him in my papers, because he was an amazing human being. And he made Africa such a better operation in terms of Ghana decolonizing itself and reaching independence. But I wouldn't have known any of that. A, had I not had the childhood I had with the parents that I had who were involved in this organization that is sponsoring this seminar. And B, I wouldn't have known any of that unless I decided to take all the steps that were led for me to decide as an adult to join this organization. So as we said before, and we will say again, even if you do not join this organization, we ask that you join some organization that has a political education concept to it, because you will not know who Kwame Nkrumah is if you do not read about this person and if you do not discuss what this person has done with other like-minded people who are hungry for knowledge, just like you are. Just an hour ago, someone emailed me and was supposed to join my work study and said, you know, hey, I actually have joined another organization, so I cannot join the party at this time. Do you think I emailed them back and said, oh, you heifer, how could you do that to us? No, I didn't do that, because guess what, family? There's so much work to be done. You don't have to be a part of the party to do it. You can be a part of another organization. And that's what I said to them. I said, our paths will cross again, because decolonizing systems of oppression is a lifelong job. Like, we're going to be doing this for the rest of our lives. So I'm committed. You seem like you're committed. I'll see you again. And I'll see you on the other side when victory prevails, because we're in it to win it, and we're almost there. So my point is, we continue to encourage you all to join organizations working for justice, because that's part of how you learn who you are, is by being around other like-minded people who too are hungry for knowledge and who too want to grow in a way that you were trying to foster, a way for you to be vulnerable, to ask questions, to be able to break down reading materials. That's what work study is all about. And I know you're tired of hearing us say it, but it really is such a beautiful process, because if you do not understand what you're reading, you don't have to be embarrassed about that. That's precisely the opportunity where you get to ask questions. And I guarantee you somebody else has the same question, because some of the readings that we do are complicated. They're not all easy to digest. Some of them are extremely complicated. But again, if you're discussing it with other people, The best case scenario is somebody else may have had a different perspective that might shed some light and give you some clarity. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we say circumstantial evidence, what we mean is that these videos, etc., use of pictures of actual indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere and African people who resemble each other physically as their evidence, along with other sad theories about the alleged loss of slave ships and other baseless conspiracy theories. We all know that we can find people of different ethnicities who resemble each other. So that's an extremely weak argument. And the research on lost slave ships that have been done by African scholars for centuries in Africa, Europe, and the Americas is overwhelming, except to those who never pursue any type of qualified research on anything. Or in other words, if it's not pre-packaged in a crafty made video, then they ain't looking for it. The fundamental basis of this confusion is something very few people are ever going to admit or talk about. This is the undeniable fact that these people promoting these lies have no knowledge of African history and therefore are only working with the backward analysis provided to them by white supremacy about Africa. And I will close with a very small and short story that, because we as party members understand the importance of identifying with Mother Africa, we also understand the importance of identifying and telling people we are African. This is also why you can visit our Etsy shop and order a sweatshirt or t-shirt that says African, period. Because there's no African American, there's no Black, there's no color, there's none of that. It's African. When I meet people, I tell them I am an African living in America. That is true to form what I tell them. And the next time I say it to someone, I will record it and play it in this seminar if you do not believe me, because that is what I believe. I despise the term African American. I would never want to be associated with this godforsaken place. And I'm not Black. I am truly African because, unlike many Africans who are ashamed and they don't want to admit that that's who they are, I know how rich Africa is. I also know that Africa is being attacked every single day. And more importantly, I know that Africa is nothing to be ashamed of. Descending from that beautiful continent is nothing to be ashamed of. That continent has provided for all of us for many, many centuries, from now until when the creation started. And we all have to be grateful for what has been given from us, because in some spaces, those resources were stolen and taken. So I am very, very grateful and humbled to know that I come from a place where we can use resources that I can use to talk to you all on this laptop, where we come from a place where resources come where I can drive my vehicle with my rubber tires, and where our children can erase mistakes they make with their pencils. I'm grateful to come from a place like that. I'm grateful to know that that's where I belong. And more importantly, that's where my ancestors are. And my story just reveals itself to say, I don't just embody those ideologies as me, Shukura. I allow them to take over my life. I believe them. I let them guide me. I let them get me out of bed every day. I take my dog to the dog park, and Europeans ask me all the time, what's your dog's name? And I am so proud, because I am a proud African, to tell them my dog's name is Bisa. It is a West African name, and it means greatly loved. And you should see the look on those Europeans' faces, because they can't process why my dog's name is not Stella or Sparky or whatever the popular dog names are for 2022, because I didn't look at that list. I went to the African name list because I knew my dog needed to have an African name. All my animals have always have African names. That's just how it's been in the Umi household. I had a hamster named Teray after Sekou Touré. My bird's name was Malcolm after Malcolm. I mean, come on, y'all got to get out of here with this. Come at me when you're ready. Okay, come at me when you're ready. This is what I'm talking about. So when I tell these Europeans my dog's name is Bisa, of course they can't fathom that. And so one of them had the nerve to ask me, where'd you get that name? And I said, well, I'm African and I have an African name. Why would my dog not have an African name too? My dog is a part of my family. I'm a part of her family. And I just looked at them. And then they were like, so greatly loved, huh? And I said, uh-huh. And then when I came back a few weeks later, somebody said, oh, I've never met your dog. What's your dog's name? Pointing to my dog. And before I could answer, the European said, that's Bisa. It's West African. It means greatly loved. So my point I'm making to you all, family, is that if we demonstrate pride because we embody that we are okay being who we are and learning about our ancestors and who we are connected to, then other people will start to learn, okay, maybe these people actually know a little something about who they are, and we need to come with it if we're going to continue to colonize them. We can't just keep pulling the veil over their head. They're actually lifting it, as their ancestor Booker T told them to, because they are seeking the knowledge that they need to overthrow us. Join an organization working for justice, and the next time you get an animal, give them a name that represents your culture and identity. Thank you.
Ashe, Ashe, thank you. And I just want to reiterate, as we've mentioned, that we are focused for the next several weeks, you all, on raising money for one of our sibling political organizations on the ground in Africa, the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists. When you see the All-African People's Revolutionary Party and you see the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, you should see it as one entity, because that's what it is. That's how we see it. That's how we move. That's how we work. And so in the course of struggling to support our sibling organizations on the ground, we're fighting to achieve our objective of Pan-Africanism. We're trying to raise money for the Zimbabwe Movement of Pan-African Socialists so they can buy books, because books are hard to come by in Africa. And if you've ever shipped anything, I ship things to all over Africa all the time. It's extremely expensive. I shipped a computer to one of our comrades in Senegal a few months ago, and it's like $450 to ship the computer. That's just how much it costs. So obviously we can't ship large supplies of books overseas. So what we're trying to do is ask people to just make small donations, $10, $15, whatever you can spare, to a betterworld.me, and 100% of what we receive is going to the Zimbabwe Movement of Pan-African Socialists so they can purchase liberatory books, books by Frantz Fanon, books by Sada Shakur, books by Mangaliso Sobukwe, books by Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Thomas Sankara. That's what we want. Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, books by Fidel Castro, Ernesto Che Guevara. That's what we want to be able to permit our comrades to get. So please help. $10, a betterworld.me. 100% of that is going towards our comrades in Zimbabwe. And then after a couple of weeks, we'll switch to comrades in another part of the continent. So going forward to what Shakura talked about, we say this all the time: truth and justice and material reality in this backward, primitive society have nothing to do with each other. And in a sane society, truth and justice and material reality should 100% of the time be the same thing. But we're so used to truth and justice having nothing to do with material reality that the majority of us, 95% of us, don't even know how to identify truth when it's smacking us in the jaw. We don't know how to identify it. We can't even identify it if it's slapping the hell out of us. We don't know what it is. So that's why we have to constantly say this, because we're so used to lies being dominant that we begin to think that lies are normalized for most of us. We don't, and then when someone tells the truth, we consider that aggressive because we're so used to hearing lies all the time and people avoiding conflict because they don't want to upset people. I mean, you should have already been upset. If you're not upset, then we need to light a fire under your rear end and see if you're still alive. I don't know. I don't understand how you couldn't be upset already. I mean, you walking around here like, I don't want to get upset. Then what the hell is going on inside of you? So I love this picture. It's an old movie. If you haven't seen it, it's one of Spike Lee, when Spike Lee was making good movies back in the 80s, 1988. It's one of the first movies that Lawrence Fishburne was in, one of the first major roles anyway. Giancarlo Esposito on the left, same thing. Tisha Campbell there. And it's a story about an African college campus and the struggles that went on there. There's a struggle for people who are fighting for social justice, which Lawrence Fishburne's character represented. And then the African fraternities, which Giancarlo Esposito's character and Tisha Campbell's characters represent. And in this scene, the Giancarlo Esposito, who's out in one of my favorite actors, he tells Lawrence Fishburne, I don't want to hear about that African mumbo jumbo. We are without question Black Americans. And I think that, this movie is almost 40 years old, but the point is to illustrate that this is not a new phenomenon, this rejection of Africa. It's always been the objective of the people in power to turn us against Africa. And so we'll talk about, some of the reasons why this is the reality and whose interest it serves for this process to take place the way it does. Because we know capitalism's gift to humanity is always idealism over reality. In other words, the chief component of this backward capitalist system is to get you thinking that immaterial reality is the only reality that matters. So in other words, whatever is in your head that's not substantiated, that's all that matters. Whatever you believe, even if you have no concrete basis to believe it, that's all that matters. That's the reason why facts don't mean anything to people anymore. Just whatever they feel means everything. Like you can give somebody 100 facts and they'll be like, yeah, I still believe this just because that's what I want to believe. That's what I feel more comfortable believing. That's the reality here. And it's important to recognize the dominance of that thinking, because a lot of us, like we'll look at people that support Trump, for example, or QAnon people, for example, and we'll say those people are crazy. They don't accept facts. But a lot of us think exactly the same way that they do. I don't understand why we criticize them. We think exactly the same way they do when it comes to topics that we care about. Now, they care about white supremacy. That's what they love and that's what they want. And we don't want that. So we see it clearly in that instance. But when it's something that we care about, then now all of a sudden we lose the ability to reason and understand the necessity of science over idealism and subjectivity. And we do it all the time. A lot of us, when it comes to things like Barack Obama, we lose all objectivity. We don't have any science. We're just like QAnon people when it comes to Obama. We want to believe everything just because we want to believe it. We can't even explain. Excuse me, I'm allergic to capitalism. We can't even explain why we believe what we believe, but we believe it because we want to believe it. And that's no different than the QAnon people and the Trump people. So I don't know why we keep criticizing them. You should go take a casserole over their house today and say, family, long lost family, I love you and your white supremacy, because you think exactly the same way they do. So that, we just got to be honest about that. Idealism is dominant in this society. It doesn't matter what it is, it's dominant. And the truth about ancient Africa is that we don't know anything about it. Anything about the truth about ancient Africa. We don't know anything about the periods that Africa came through. Like if we start talking about Africa started in a communal stage thousands of years ago, 99.9% of us don't know when that was. We don't know what communalism is. We don't know what it looked like. And if we say, well, communalism evolved into a dominant system of slavery about 15,000 years ago. We don't know anything about that. We've allowed these right-wing reactionaries to confuse the economic period of dominant slavery that I'm talking about right now with the transatlantic slavery of 500 years ago. So we don't even know the difference between the slave system of 15,000 years ago and the slave system of 400 years ago. We've allowed them to convince us that it's the same thing. So that's why, and the reason why I know that's true is because they will tell a lot of us, well, everybody had slavery. Africans sold Africans into slavery. That was a thing. And we'll be like, oh, yeah, okay. Because we don't know anything. They're telling us that, okay, we don't even have sense enough to know, okay, what are you talking about? Because there's two distinctly different periods of history where slavery had an impact on African people. But the important thing is that we don't even understand enough about that to know that the slavery of 15,000 years ago has no impact on our lives today. It has no impact on anybody's life. Slavery existed in about 195 countries 15,000 years ago. And that has no impact on the world today that you can quantify. It doesn't. Whereas the slavery of 500 years ago, the transatlantic triangular slave trade defines everything about our lives today. So if you don't know the difference between the two, that's why people are so confused. and the slave trade. What's the truth about this? Like, we don't know anything about the slave trade. We don't know how it manifested. What was the process? Because we'll sit here, these people will tell us, well, we just rode into Africa and the Africans came to the shore and they came and helped us dock our ship and they got us out and we showed them immediately how to survive. They didn't know how to. They'd been in Africa thousands of years, but they didn't know how to survive. So when we came from Europe, we showed them how to survive, and they thanked us. They cooked for, and then they said, "Well, why don't you take these people because we don't need them." And they just took the people and graciously gave us the people, and then we were so humanistic in how we did it. We took the Mandinkas and the Wolofs and the Fulanis, and we kept them all together. Like, is that your brother, your parents? Put them all in the same shuttle. We had air-conditioned shuttles, and the shuttles drove across the Atlantic Ocean, and they were able to make the trip in 48 hours. I mean, that's the way we act. They tell us this stuff, and a lot of us would believe it if they told it exactly how I'm being facetious, but if they told us that enough times on CNN, MSNBC, and these backward school systems and every other at church and every other form of backward propaganda that they use against us, if they did that enough, a lot of us would be arguing in favor of those ridiculous things I just said, because that's all it takes is for them to tell us something and we accept it. When the reality is we don't know anything about what happened during slavery. We don't know anything about that. And we sit here and rely on these people to make their movies that completely disrespect what our ancestors go through. And we think we have that's how sad the situation is. And then what was plantation like? For example, what was plantation like all through the Americas, not just in this backward, what hole, but all over the Americas? What was plantation life like? What were some of the commonalities of African plantation life in Jamaica, in Brazil, in Bolivia, in Honduras, in the US? What were some of the similarities? What were some of the differences? What were some of the manifestations? What were some of the most important things that make it impossible for us to disconnect all of those experiences as they would have us do? We don't even, nobody, like people say things like, well, all we do is talk. Where are you going where all people are doing is talking about the things I'm telling you about right now? Where are you going where that's happening? What church are you attending where people are talking about what happened on the plantation? What club are you going to? What bar are you in where that's the dominant conversation? What school are you sending your kids to or that you went to where that was the dominant conversation? That is not the dominant conversation anywhere. The dominant conversation right now is, are the 49ers beating the Rams? That's the dominant conversation in this backward country right now. You cannot dispute that. That's all people care about. Or who's going to be with the Atlanta Housewives, whatever the hell that's, I don't know. But what's happening, or who's going to slap the what out of who on that show? That's the dominant thing people are talking about. Nobody's dominantly talking about these concepts that we're talking about here. And that's why we're in the backward condition that we're in. And then people, listen to this. Think about this for a second. We are out here, and this is the sole reason why I don't do it. We are out here paying European capitalist corporations hundreds of dollars to find out our ancestry. I'm not against it. I understand why people want to do it. And it's actually helping, because all these people who don't want to respect Africa and deny Africa doing the DNA test, and not one of them can produce a test that says, oh, I was in Florida for 4,000 years. My parents come from California 4,000 years ago. They were right there in Texas. None of them can produce a report. All of them say Ghana, the Congo, wherever it is in Africa. So that part is good. But it's just ironic that we're spending hundreds of dollars to pay European capitalist corporations to find out who we are, when it's European capitalist corporations that are the reason that we're confused in the first place. Like, that's just the reality of our existence in capitalism. But at least if people are going to take those tests, like when people tell me, well, I'm indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, like I had a sister tell me that, and she had already told me she took the DNA test. I was like, well, where's your test? Oh, Well, I have it. I'm like, well, let's look at it. Because you're telling me it should say, well, my people were from right there in Phoenix, Arizona. 4,000 years ago, we were in Phoenix. We were there at the OK Corral when the Earp brothers fought the McClendons and whoever the hell those people were. The Battle of OK Corral in 1881. We were right there when that happened. You should be able to demonstrate that. She couldn't demonstrate that. Her thing said Kenya. So I said, so if your thing says Kenya, she said $400 for it. I mean, you must believe in it. If you spent that much money on it, then what are you talking about? And then she, started gaslighting me. Well, you're being rude. You're being, hell yeah, I'm being rude. I wish I had a shotgun right now. I mean, that kind of nonsense is incredibly insane, and it's insulting to our ancestors. So I don't have to be nice to you if you're going to be that stupid. I mean, I have obligation to the people that sacrifice for us. I have no obligation to you acting a boo-boo fool. And I'm not feeling any desire or need or commitment to have to honor your feelings, because ignorance is so important to so many of us. Like, you should be uncomfortable. That's part of what we need to do more of. And the core reason why they hate us so much is because we're Africans. That's what people believe. This whole concept of anti-Blackness. They just hate us because we're Black. They just hate us because we're Black. That's what it is. That's it. They just hate us because of how we look. You think this whole 500 years has been about how we look? I mean, how shallow. That's some shallow water, you all. If that's what people really believe. The whole thing is just because of how we look and talk and dance. That whole destabilizing of the entire planet is because they can't dance like us. I mean, that is like a kindergartner level of consciousness. When the truth is, this system exists because it has allowed the people on power, the multinational capitalists, to maintain power. And they do that because they control Africa. And in order for them to continue to control Africa, they've got to keep us confused about Africa. Because if we're not confused about Africa, then we're going to start asking questions. Why is Africa poor and we're poor, but Africa produces most of the riches on earth? They don't want us to start asking those questions. So they keep us confused. And so that's why we sit up here today. Well, I'm going to try to get this job because I'm an American. And since I'm an American, I got rights. I don't know how we should be the slightest bit confused about why we're in the situation we're in, if that's the level of consciousness we allow ourselves to operate on. When clearly there's clear evidence all around us about who we are. Sickle cell anemia, right? What is sickle cell anemia? It's the mutation of the blood cells to the point where it becomes problematic, right? Well, where did it come from? Well, sickle cell anemia happens to us. Europeans don't get sickle cell anemia in mass. Asians don't get it in mass. Indigenous people don't get it in mass. Only African people get it in mass. And not just African people in the US, African people, period, get it. The reason why is because the cell mutation process is the body's way of fighting off malaria. Now, there's no malaria in Sacramento or Memphis or Baltimore, Maryland, or Detroit, Michigan, or Miami, Florida, or Los Angeles, California. The malaria, you all, is in Africa. So we have been African for thousands of years. We have been in the Americas a mere 500 years. The quantity of that makes me wanting to call myself an African American insane. That doesn't even quantify it. So these examples like sickle cell anemia are a manifestation of the fact that even though we've been in this hellhole 500 years, we are still, without question, Africans. And even if we are too dumb to know it, our blood cells and our body understand that clearly. We say things like mama. We call our mothers mama, our grandmothers big mama. You ever heard a European call their mother or their grandmother mom? No, they don't call their people that. That's us. Why? Because mama is a Swahili word. See, the master beat us relentlessly, but they couldn't beat everything out of us. Some stuff slipped through. And so we still have many of our languages today. We still speak many manifestations. Like we talk about the A instead of the ER on words. Well, linguists, this is not a job move like, well, he don't know what he's talking about. Well, this is your linguist that you pay thousands of dollars in tuition to study under, that have produced reports that confirm that most of the African languages didn't have this concept of ER in languages that we spoke on the continent. They didn't have that. So that's why we were forced to speak English, Spanish, Portuguese, German, all of these colonial languages, French. We were forced through violence to speak these languages. So it's not going to transmit perfectly. So some of the stuff is slipped through. And we still maintain, if you study different languages than the one you were born and raised to speak, you know one of the most difficult things to do is understand how to properly pronounce the words. Because if the vowel structure is different than English, and English is your language, you only know how to pronounce words in English, the words aren't going to come out right when you pronounce them in other languages. Well, guess what? We still pronounce words in our traditional African languages that didn't have the ER manifestation. That's what that is. Why? Because we are Africans, period. And then the challenges of this lie are that it's just this concept that we're not African. We've been here forever, not a shred of proof. Again, that's the Trump people, not a shred of proof. The election was stolen, no proof. And you're upset with them, but then you'll let somebody tell you, well, we're not African, there's no slave ships, not a shred of proof to their claim. You'll accept that. You just like the Trump people. You should go over right now, find the Trump people, put on a Trump hat and be a part of that, because you're the same as they are. You know better than they are. So don't look down your nose at them. Don't say they're crazy. You should go out there and march with them if you have the same logic system that they have. And it's so disrespectful because there's so much evidence about slave ships. Like ships, anything you put in the water, salt water over a period of time, what's going to happen to it? It's going to disintegrate. So these idiots think that ships that sunk hundreds of years ago are just going to be intact at the bottom of the ocean. Like, what? I mean, I don't even know how to respond to some of this ridiculous idiocy. You know, there's scientific theories about this stuff, you all. There are scholars who have uncovered remnants of slave ships for centuries. John James wrote a whole book about it. But if read is a dirty four-letter word to us, we'll never see that. We'll never see it. So we got to understand how disrespectful this is to, first, the indigenous people, because this is their land. It's not our land. This is their land. Somebody come in your house and kick your behind and throw you out of your house, and then come talking about, and then take some servants in to clean the house up for them, because that's who we are, whether we want to admit it or not. And then the servants come talking about, this is my house. I mean, they look like a fool saying that. The first thing you say is, you're a slave, you're a servant. What are you talking about? You don't own anything. And then the second thing you would say is, it's not even your house anyway. Well, that's how we look, family talk. We're African, we're Americans, we're African Americans. It's not even your house. And you don't even own anything here. You're a slave here. It's not your house. You don't own this country. You're just here because somebody kidnapped you and brought you here. And so dumb, we don't even know, well, let's try to get home. So we just want to, well, master, I'm just going to slay here in this house and be your slave. And I'll fight harder for this house than you will. Because that's what slave mentality do. That's what those folks with the slave mentality do. So it's just so disrespectful to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. A prideful people would always be trying to find their way home. A prideful people would always be trying to assert their dignity. It would never be trying to fit in with what their master told. We're so proud to speak English. We're so proud. You hear these Negroes all the time. My name is Carl. They'll sit there and ask me, what's your name? Ajama. Well, that's an interesting name. And I want to say, coon, You got an interesting name because you named after your master. You like a damn dog named after your master and proud of that. Just like the dog, Rover. Proud. I'm Rover. I'm proud to be. That's how you look and sound right now. I got a name that reflects my ancestors. I don't care if it sounds strange to you because I know it sounds strange to you because the only way you see the world is through your master's eyes. So we got to stop being disrespectful to the indigenous people. And of course, while it's disrespectful to them, it's also disrespectful to our mother Africa and our ancestors because they fought. They didn't fight for, you think our ancestors fought in Africa and on the slave ships and on the plantation so that you could sit up in a big house and watch the 49ers play the Rams? Like they were sitting there getting ready to get killed by the master. I'm gonna fight. I gotta reach deeper to survive because they gotta be able to watch the 49ers beat the Rams. That's what's important right now. So I'm gonna reach deeper to kill this slave master so that they can do that. That's all that matters, is that they can watch the football game. That's all that matters, nothing else. That they can have a big house and a Tesla. They can drive that and brag about having a Tesla. That's all that my head is going to get chopped off so that they could do that. I know, at least I hope nobody listening to this is that stupid. I know we all understand that our people struggled and sacrificed so that we could be here to do what we do, make the world a better place. So by trying to disconnect us from our ancestors and our struggle is so incredibly disrespectful to our mother Africa and to our ancestors who are the sole reason that we are here. I mean, we're so crazy. We'll sit up here. I got the Tesla. Everything on the Tesla came from Africa. Everything sitting in the driver's seat of the Tesla came from Africa. And we sitting here doing our best to imitate Judeo-Christian European society. I mean, that is a sick reality that we live in. And then ignorance promotes disunity, and disunity serves the people benefiting from these bad conditions that we exist. In other words, the dumber we are, you all, the more it benefits the people who keep us in this position so that they can maintain power over us. The smarter we are and the more we become aware of our circumstances, the weaker it allows them to be, because the smarter we are, the more we'll see the necessity to come together. And our unity is the best weapon we have against their ability to dominate us. So this is just what we're doing right now, does nothing except benefit them. You sitting there like, I know everything, I haven't studied anything. I love my sister to death, but I tell her all the time, she argues with me about everything. Everything I say, she argues. And I know for a fact, she's rare. I know she's only been to Los Angeles. She's in San Francisco where I grew up. She's only been to Los Angeles once. That happened in the 70s. And she's been to Las Vegas a couple of times for a few days. Other than that, she's traveled nowhere. And if you put a gun to her head, she wouldn't read a book. So I'm always saying, how do you know what you know? You've never studied anything. You've never been anywhere. How do you know what you know? She's still arguing. I mean, that's all that helps our enemies, you all. That's all it does. I tell her, you have a government job. You work for the government. All spreading the ignorance you spread, you a government. What do you mean I work for the government? No, you do, because you're promoting their program for them. That's what you're doing. Every time you open your mouth, they should give you a bonus, because all you're doing is helping them do everything they want to do. So ignorance is not our friend, you all. And unity, of course, is our best weapon. And since we love to compare things so much, let's do that. Let's talk about how no Asian people, no indigenous people, no Arab people, no other people are really believing that they can advance themselves while being disconnected from their history and culture. We're the only people, Africans here in this backward country, that believe that somehow we can find the magic formula to advancement while being totally ignorant and totally disconnected from who we are. And the only thing I say to that is, how has that worked out for us? Like, how is that translated into great success for us as a people? Yeah, a few token coon Negroes who sell out and represent the master, they'll get some slave penance Yeah, a few of us have done that, but the masses of our people are suffering as much as we ever have, if not more. So clearly that strategy does not work for us. Clearly it doesn't work. So why don't we try to consider that maybe we might want to see that trying to fit in and pretend with this American thing is not working for us. Let's try to go and see who we really are and see if that can help us and see what our true, because if we know who we really are, maybe we might come to understand what our real interests are. Because that's what it's all about. When we say that you're African, we're talking about a primarily political identity. We're not just talking about a biological. You know, you talk to people, well, I'm African. Well, my father's white. So I can't, like, it's not a biological, like, it turns my stomach when people talk about that because it's so ignorant. It's so besides the point. I don't care what biology you're talking about came through your family. The question is, how do you walk through this society? If one of your parents is European and one of your parents is African, there's a good chance that you are forced to walk through this society as an African, because that's how you're going to have to engage in this society. So you're smart enough to know that. So that's why you do that. So that's a political decision. There's nothing to do with biology. That's a political decision. So you make the decision, I'm going to identify with my African element of my life, because that's the life that defines my existence. That's a political decision. If you look anything like African and you walking around here thinking you're white, you're going to be in for a devastating experience time and time again, because politically that's just not feasible for you. So that's why it's important to understand these things. When we say you're African, that's a political designation. You are African because you are connected to African people's experiences, African people's history and culture. And yes, Africa, you're connected to that. Whether you want to be or not, doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. You cannot change that, because your entire existence is based on all of those things I just said. It's based on Africa, your history and culture. If you live in the US, if you live in the Western Hemisphere, if you're born in Africa, but you're in the US and the Western Hemisphere to get an education, why couldn't you get an education in Africa? Because of colonialism. So everything about your life is because of what's happened to Africa. So that's why it's important to understand the necessity of identifying with Africa, because clearly if the reason you're in the situation you're in is because of what's happened and what's happening to Africa, you have to become conscious about Africa to understand how to get out of the situation. How the hell is what happened to Africa going to be the reason you're in the situation you're in, but you're going to solve the problem by voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and living in Beverly Hills, California, and having nothing to do with your history? How is that going to solve anybody's problem? It's not even going to solve your individual problem. Because if you live in Beverly Hills, you're going to have a whole lot of problems as an African. So why is that? Because you're not dealing with the reality of the situation of who we are and what we actually represent in this society. You know, if you don't believe that, then I challenge you, just go to any all-white suburb in your car, have a nice car, and drive around. You're going to get pulled over. I guarantee you. You drive around long enough, you're going to get pulled over. Have a beat up car, you're going to get pulled over sooner. Okay, so whatever it is, don't matter how much money you have or whatever, that's going to happen to you. Nobody hearing this can deny that's true. So clearly, what does that tell you? That it doesn't matter what's in your head about who you are. There are objective conditions that define who you are. And one of those is our history and our culture as African people. So no one has made significant contributions to their people while relying primarily on the information coming from their enemies. So if you can't say, well, I regularly study the conditions of our history as African people, and most of your information comes from these capitalist news outlets, well, that's why you're confused. If you acknowledge that statement, then just say to yourself, I'm confused. Just acknowledge. You don't have to tell anybody else. You know, we don't like to be honest. and admit that we're confused about anything. So just say it to yourself. I'm confused as you know what, and then go to work to do something about it. That's all. It's a correctable problem. And that's all we want to do. We're not trying to embarrass anybody or put anybody down, because we all have been ignorant around this question. We've all had to come through this process. So we're just trying to agitate a little to get people to want to do that. And no national liberation movement has ever had capitalism as its base. So that can be your litmus test. Anybody that's pro-capitalism, they cannot be for African liberation, because the two are diametrically opposed to one another. So Kamala Harris, pro-capitalist, mass incarceration specialist, cannot be for African liberation. Umar Johnson, pro-capitalist, pro-patriarchy, cannot be for African liberation. I don't care how much your mouth moves and says Pan-Africanism. And that doesn't mean, there are all sorts of positive elements about African nationalism. So you can just saying, our people need to come together and unify. Just saying African people are beautiful people. Just saying African people being in relationships with African people is beautiful. Just saying all that stuff, those are positive things. But that cannot be it. That someone who believes those things, someone can be in an African family, all African family, raising African children, working, providing, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a positive thing for humanity. It depends on what their interests are and what they're pursuing. If they're just pursuing capitalist goals, well, buy a house, promote capitalism, join the military, fight for the enemy against humanity. That's not a good thing, you all. So that's why we say, just because someone has some things they say that are good doesn't mean that they're for African liberation. There's criteria to that. You cannot be for capitalism and be for African liberation. There's no way around that. So just to conclude, we have so much work to do to raise this struggle around identity. And it's all of our responsibility to raise it and raise the bar and raise the question. And so if you want resources, additional resources about, understanding that question better, books to read on African history, we can certainly give you our book list in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. There are great books on African history in there. How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, The World in Africa by W.E.B. Du Bois. All of these types of books are great African history books that you can read and understand the history of Africa, the cultural unity of Black Africa by Cheikh Anta Diop. There's so many books that can do that. Ivan Van Sertima's books. There's so many. So reach out to us if you want to know more about that. Come join us next week, you all, February 6th. We're going to be talking about Hollywood's defanging of African militancy. I was watching The Godfather of Harlem this morning, and the character playing Malcolm X, the sister comes in and says, Assalamu alaikum. And he says, Salaikum salam. This is in the show. You can look at it. It's episode 5. You don't believe me. He says, Salaikum salam. They don't even care enough about you to get the Arabic words correctly. It's not Salaikum salam. It's Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. Like, they don't even care enough about you to respect you enough to get the words correctly. Right? They don't even care. And that's just the beginning. There's all kinds of things wrong with it. But next week, we're going to be talking about how Hollywood wants to defang African militancy. The role of Hollywood is to confuse you and make you think that all you've ever tried to do is fit in as an American. So we're going to be talking about that. Shakur mentioned the APRP Forward Ever Shop. Please go there and support. Stamp out confusion. Get you an African period T-shirt and sweatshirt. I got both. Get them both. Get all that. Wear African on your chest. You'll feel better. It's therapy. It's medicine for the soul. So do that. The link is right there. aprp-intl.org. Join us, you all. Join our Pan-African work. We're getting ready to have a landmark international Pan-African APRP meeting in Africa here in a number of months. And if I'm living, I certainly will be there. And this is going to catapult our struggle forward. So help us in this work. We're moving forward with it. A betterworld.me, that's where you can donate. to the Zimbabwe movement for Pan-African Socialists. So we ask you, even if you just have $5, go in there and do it. And we're raising money for them so they can buy liberatory books. All right. So we appreciate you very much for doing that. Thank you. And hoodcommunist.org, one of the editors for that wonderful weekly blog. Every Thursday we have articles, so check that out at hoodcommunist.org. Every other Thursday we have a session where on Telegram, you can download Telegram free on your smartphone. So do that. This Thursday we'll be meeting at 7:30 Eastern time there with a topic. So look for that. We have all these wonderful broadcasts here, Pantula, Revolutionary African Women, Forward Ever, and the Comrades in New Mexico, Thursday at noon Mountain Time. They've been doing theirs just about as long, if not longer, than we've been doing this one. So support all of these. Great information coming from these. Support independent revolutionary African organization, you all. And my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I'm going to continue to ask people to buy it. People are still buying it. It's a year later. It's still selling. We're using all the money. All the money I'm getting from that, I'm sending to the Zimbabwe movement for Pan-African Socialists, as well as using to promote the community defense work that I'm doing here in Sacramento and in some other areas around the country. So support us in this work. We appreciate you all. We thank you. Now you can go watch the football game. We appreciate you for being here with us, though, for this hour. Forward ever, backwards never. Always stay clever in any endeavor. And capitalism, you already know, like patriarchy and homophobia, it's got to go. Have a great rest of